I am going to bring up the catalyst and sponsor of this evening, Dr. Elizabeth Wood.
I am so excited to see all of you here, and I'm so excited to be launching my book, which is a book about taking care of my kinky mom when she was dying of cancer, here at this summit, but maybe for a reason you wouldn't expect. And it has to do with the summit and the fact that it's 10 years old this year. 10 years ago, I met Ricky Levy at a sandwich shop, Potbelly sandwich shop, as a matter of fact, across the street from the hospital where my mother was being treated for cancer. And it was the first time Ricky and I had met in person. And we were meeting because I wanted to learn about this organization she told me she had called Woodhull Freedom Foundation, because it needed a bit of a new direction. And we sat and we talked, and I was so moved by the community building and coalition kind of work that Woodhull does that I just immediately fell in love with the organization. And it wasn't long, it was within the year that we had mapped out the foundation for the first ever State of Sexual Freedom in the United States report, and that we had created the first Sexual Freedom Day gathering. That gathering was a half a day. It was one plenary and 2 panels and an awards lunch, and it almost bankrupted us as an organization. But we knew we were onto something. We knew that one of the biggest contributions Woodhull could make to the sexual freedom movement was bringing people together from across all of the different branches of the sexual freedom movement. And that was something that was rare. It was something that didn't happen very often. And from that one small event to today, the summit has grown to 4 days worth of incredible workshops. We've got almost 100 presenters representing an enormous range of communities. And it's that reason that I am so excited to be launching the book here. And because I wanted to celebrate the book with all of you, I wanted to celebrate the spirit of community that we create when we're here. And so I am so honored that we're doing this with all of these amazingly talented artists and writers and makers whose work you see around the room. So I want to leave you with that. I want to thank Mindy, Allie Geisler, who you may know as Mindy Mimosa. She has organized our Bubbles and Burlesque night for many summits, but we were so glad that she agreed this year to organize all of our evening events. So the fact that I get to have a fabulous book launch party is much to do with Allie's hard work. And I also just want to thank Ricky, because it is her relentless commitment to sexual freedom and her personal support of me that's allowed this book to happen and allowed this event to happen. So with that, let's get started.
Good evening, everyone. My name is August McLaughlin. I'm the host and creator of Girl Boner and Girl Boner Radio. And this is my first time at Woodhull. I'm very excited. Every year people tell me I have to come. And this year, Joan Price said, "You are coming." And you never say no to Joan Price. So here I am. I'm so honored to share a reading from my book called Girl Boner. It's a guide to sexual empowerment, helping you deepen your sexual self-discovery. I also have a journal that's a guidebook that has a lot of stories and blank pages. And both books are full of true stories. And this one comes from my own life. It's from chapter 5, which is called The Big Bodacious O. And the story is called My Brain on Orgasm. When I first learned that a journalist had been selected to masturbate to orgasm in an MRI machine, I was a little bit jealous. I'd come a long way since the life-changing orgasm with my trusty dildo, and even further from the college paper I wrote on why I didn't need to masturbate. Once I realized the pleasure I could experience on my own and the mighty benefits it invited, solo play became and has remained a passion of mine. I'd grown somewhat masterful at my own solo exploration, or so I had thought, and was writing increasingly about sexuality. Didn't that, paired with my inclination to tell the world about most everything girl boner-esque and my near obsession with understanding what happens inside the body, make me the perfect candidate for such an experiment? Perhaps I hadn't made my suitability clear. As chance or fate would have it, I ended up sitting next to the lead researcher of the orgasm MRI studies, Barry Komisarek, the following year at North America's first World Sexual Health Day celebration in New York City. A year after that, I sat in a small room at Rutgers University, being suited up with a custom mask that looked a little more horror sci-fi than spicy adventure, or maybe a colander. It didn't take long for me to realize that in all of my fantasies about participating in orgasm research, I had failed to consider a very important thing: the MRI machine. It required the mask, which would help hold my head perfectly still, yes, still, as I played with myself to sounds comparable to gunshots, and a cramped device many people freak out in. On top of all of that, I would have to lie flat on my back, by far my least favorite solo play position. Had I ever come that way? I should have practiced, but it was too late for that. If you feel you can't breathe once you're inside, don't worry, you aren't actually dying, a technician told me. You're probably just claustrophobic. Hit that eject button and it'll shoot you right back out. Was I claustrophobic? I tried to recall the last time I had been sandwiched in a tube the size of a coffin, but came up with nothing. If I didn't hyperventilate, I would stay in, following text slides that prompted me to think about or partake in certain actions. Imagine having my nipples touched, then actually touch my nipples. Imagine having my clitoris touched, and then actually touch my clitoris. Imagine a speculum being inserted into my vagina. That was a control factor, though I did wonder if the fantasy would add an interesting twist to my next gyno visit. So how does one accustomed to dildos and lying flat on her belly, as she moves about freely with nothing but her fingers, while nearly motionless and tied down and not in a kinky way? My question precisely. I decided to fess up to the researchers. I may not be able to orgasm after all, I said, apologizing profusely if I had wasted their time or resources. Not to worry, they assured me. Not experiencing orgasm, experiencing versus reaching orgasm is Komisarek's preferred terminology I have since adopted, would be just as helpful. And would I like to try it with a toy? Oh my God, would I ever? And so I would go at it twice, once with my fingers solo, once with a brand spanking new purple body-safe dildo I call Hank E-Panky. Once everyone was ready, researcher and longtime sex therapist Nan Wise guided me through a room of technicians seated at computers who would monitor the experiment opposite a glass wall. I looked around at that groovy team who were all there to make sure I had a safe and pleasant experience while gathering quality research. This wasn't quite what I had meant when I asked the universe for an orgy, but heck, I would take it. I sat down on the MRI bed, suited up in a robe, slippers, and my adorable mask, feeling like an astronaut ready to launch into the great unknown. I thought of Masters and Johnson, Virginia especially. As much as I would have preferred to get busy freely on a bed like their research participants did decades before, I liked to think they might be proud. As the bed rolled into the machine, I brushed my thumb over the emergency button, my eyes closed. Dear God, please don't let claustrophobia stand in the way of my girl boner. Once inside, I opened my eyes, pleasantly surprised by the sense of peace and calm I felt. It was actually quite cozy. While I still figured I wouldn't climax, certainly not with my fingers only, I no longer felt stressed over it. Pardon the spoiler, but therein lies some orgasmic magic. I never could have predicted what followed. The visual prompts seemed to move slowly, like very, very slowly. Seriously, could we hurry things up a little? Once I surrendered to the pacing, falling into a rhythm, it struck me how powerful my girl boner became when I didn't rush. Lesson number 2. Arousal sprinkled, then flamed from my head to my toes as I imagined, then touched. Envisioning my nipples being touched sent me reeling, as did imagining my partner suckling them. No one had said I couldn't let my mind wander. And thinking of or touching my clit, holy bejesus. Numerous times I felt as though I might explode. If only I could roll over. It was like moving to the very edge of utter euphoria only to be nudged backward, halt. Or a bite of perfect chocolate, yanked from your mouth before you could chew. I've since learned there's a term for this, orgasm control. Finally, I gave up, chalking up this mild, pleasurable release I had experienced to surrender. A gal can only take that kind of you're not allowed to come torture for so long. I let the team know and rolled back out. Did you experience orgasm? Dr. Komisarek asked with a friendly smile. I almost blurted no, but had I? I observed my wetness, the full body flushing, the intense swelling of my labia that only followed coming. Holy crap, yes. A bit later, after experiencing countless fantasies plus 2 orgasms, the second with Hank, I sat on a train headed back to New York City, considering the countless times I had experienced small bursts of pleasure I had discounted as insufficient, or pleasure on the way to the really good stuff. No doubt, I had been climaxing all along. How could I, several years into my work in researching and writing about sex, still be unraveling significant mysteries about my own body and sexuality? As frustrating as that epiphany seemed, it's also pretty wondrous. Dear Clit, you're more awesome than I've given you credit for. I promise to celebrate you deeply and more often. August. Thank you so much.
See that stool? That's for me. I'll be reading from Sex After Grief, Navigating Your Sexuality After Losing Your Beloved, which is my new book. Official release date is today. My love affair with Robert Rice was the reason that I decided to write about sex and aging at age 61 with Better Than I Ever Expected, Straight Talk About Sex After 60. Over 14 years, one book turned into 4, and this one makes 5. Senior sex education in its many forms, books, articles, my blog, speaking engagements, Q&A column, webinars, a newsletter, became my mission and my life. But when my second book, Naked at Our Age, Talking Out Loud About Senior Sex, was just a glimmer in my eye and 2 pages of notes, Robert, by then my husband, died. That word insists that I write it again and again, as if the word is animate and claws repeatedly at my heart and my tear ducts. My grief journey has lasted more than 10 years as I write this book at age 75. I've gone from such intense wailing, sobbing, and keening that I couldn't leave the house to living with joy again, becoming capable of laughter and intimacy once more, and letting a new dear person into my heart. During that time, I cycled through a roller coaster of despair before learning to be a fully alive sexual being again. How do we become capable of sex and intimacy when the person we want most to share this with is dead? How do we find our way to letting someone else in? How do we know when we're ready? Is there one way that works for everyone? Well, the easy answer to that last question is no. We all experience grief in our own way, and that includes the myriad ways that we invite sex into our lives, or don't, and we change along the way. We all respond differently, and as you'll hear me say throughout this book, however you respond is normal. Yes, the first year is the hardest, except for, in their own way, all the others. That's Gabriel Berkner. I'm a sex educator, author, blogger, public speaker. You'd think that with all I know about sex and how much I value it, I would have had an easy transition back into sex myself after Robert died. Not so. Even though I wrote about sex during that time, it took me months to feel sexual stirrings and begin pleasuring myself, and years to become sexual with a partner. Yes, years. The last time Robert and I made love was 3 months before he died in August 2008. From the time Robert became too ill for sex through the first 3 months after his death, I felt no sex drive whatsoever and no sexual connection to my body. I couldn't imagine wanting to have another man touch me, nor did I even have any desire to touch myself. My collection of vibrators stayed in a drawer. My only sex fantasies were memories of Robert as a healthy, loving, and enthusiastic sex partner. These memories led to great gulping tears, not arousal. 5 months after Robert's death, I had a dream, which I recorded in my journal. I was with a new man, a stranger. He was behind me, his arms around my waist, and suddenly I could feel his erection through our clothes. I felt the stirrings of a sexual tingle. Then I woke up and discovered I really was aroused. I sat up in bed calling out, "I'm alive!" I marveled at the time that my dormant sexuality was suddenly waking up. Amazingly, it would take 3 more years before I would welcome another human being into my body, and longer than that before I could do that joyfully. Along the way, I tried to date, have sex with a buddy, date, have sex with a former lover, date some more, but it was like a slow train that had its own schedule. Nothing I tried to do ended some mysterious inner timetable. There are no bad dates. I tell my attendees of my webinar or workshop, how the heck do I date at this age? There are only good stories. There may be tears and fears and ghosts when you start or attempt to start dating, but I assure you, if you keep at it, it will get better. Take every first date as an opportunity to practice dating again as you seek to resolve these quandaries. What kind of person am I looking for? What kind of relationship would work for me right now? How do I meet people? What sort of person will find me appealing? Can I be myself on a date, or do I need to play a role? How much do I reveal about my grief? Is it off limits to talk about my deceased partner? What if I get rejected? How can I see myself with a new person when I've been with my late partner exclusively for, fill in the blank, years? I've learned a lot from my 11 years of not dating, withdrawing from dating again, not having sex, crying, laughing, and finally enjoying new partners. The emotions sometimes felt out of control, and I didn't know which me to present to another person when I didn't know which me was true or would be true the next morning. If you don't know if you're ready to date, it's okay to try it and then put dating on hold if it feels wrong. You're not making any kind of commitment that you can't reverse. The same is true for sex. You can explore, then change your mind at any point. In 2017, OkCupid brought me a man who had just lost his wife after a long illness. He needed to learn to live with joy again, and this included sex. Our first date was instant attraction. and we discovered we had many qualities, interests, and core beliefs in common. He was brainy, fit, attractive, and physically and intellectually active. He thought my work was fascinating. A flurry of emails followed our first date as we tried to learn all we could about each other. In one, he asked, "Can you imagine having sex with me?" I replied, "I'm imagining it now." We became sexual on our second date. 2 years later, we're still enjoying each other.
So as you know, this is a book about my kinky mother and her cancer and the end of her life. So the first selection I'm just going to read you two short pieces, addresses a little bit about how I found out she was kinky. And then I'm going to read Ricky's favorite section of the book as a celebration, as a present to her. There. In 2001 or 2002, my mother called to ask excitedly, "Did you know that you can get paid to hurt men and you don't even have to have sex with them?" She'd just returned from a freelance copy editing interview where her potential employer had turned out to be an adult magazine publisher. At the interview, she'd been asked to edit an advertising section, and the dominatrix ads had apparently given her a new perspective on things. My mother had told me several times in the past that she'd never enjoyed sex with my father, her first and longest lasting sexual relationship. She'd had one serious sexual relationship shortly after Daddy had moved out, and while satisfying, that one had apparently been doomed. I remember him having dark fuzzy hair and a shark's tooth on a leather cord around his neck. He roughhoused with Angie, that's my sister, and me, and we adored him. Years later, Mom told me that she'd really loved him too, but he hadn't been ready to commit. Then again, she hadn't been ready to get sober, so maybe she hadn't been ready to commit either. After Shark Tooth, and then the move to Pennsylvania, and her sobriety, there was a short string of boyfriends, none of whom lasted very long. Angie and I gave them animal nicknames. I particularly remember the one we called the Chicken, because he had a skinny neck and pink skin and a prominent Adam's apple. He drove a green gremlin with a tape deck that always seemed to be playing an album by the Coasters. We requested the song Charlie Brown so often I'm sure we ruined the tape. Then there was the second marriage, followed swiftly by the second divorce, and then nobody. For 2 decades, Mom didn't even date. Her long-standing cynicism and distrust of men was no secret. Yes, I assured her. I know, pro-doms often don't include intercourse or oral sex in the work they do. This led to an interesting discussion about what kinds of work might fall under the umbrella of sex work and what kinds of activities constitute having sex. I felt like I was suddenly in a graduate seminar on gender and sexuality. It was wonderful. We even discussed whether or not she thought she could accept money for erotic interaction. She thought she could not, though she could certainly accept presents. I didn't push her to examine the difference. She didn't take the copy editing job, but as a way of acknowledging her expression of interest in the worlds of bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism and masochism, I gave her a copy of Jay Weissman's SM-101 for Christmas that year. As far as I could tell, she read it and then put it on the shelf in the living room, where it sat between volumes on macrame and codependence for years, gathering dust. I didn't want her to take up BDSM out of anger or cynicism, but I believed that if she could imagine sex where she maintained control, where she would only engage in the acts that she really enjoyed, and where a man voluntarily submitted to her, she might find her way to a relationship that could be sexually and emotionally fulfilling. Happily, after she let the dust gather for a few years, that's exactly what happened. My concern with my mother's sexual fulfillment may not be typical of daughters. But I'm glad that our unconventional, if frequently dysfunctional, relationship with its lack of clear parent-child boundaries has allowed me to witness and even facilitate some of her discoveries. Despite the fact that adults are supposed to seek sexual advice from friends, therapists, and sex educators instead of from their children, but maybe not for the people in this room, I don't feel uncomfortable about the way my mother has shared the details of her sex life with me. In fact, most of the time I enjoy it. The book is written in the present tense. It's always a relief when she shares something that's not about neediness, fear, or guilt, or failure. Witnessing her development as a Domme has been liberating for me. I take pleasure in her pleasure. It hasn't been an imposition or an embarrassment when she's shared her Domme adventures. It's been a celebration. And as we're celebrating, I just want to share with you Ricky's favorite section in the book. And it's in a chapter called Power, or Madam Butterfly. Well, you were a wild one, weren't you, Miss Judy? Shania has just spotted the fading butterfly tattoo on my mother's right butt cheek as she cleans her up and applies the cream that is intended to protect her skin. Shania is a tall, broad-shouldered black woman I imagine to be in her mid-20s, with a gruff, no-nonsense demeanor that somehow never seems to conflict with her gentleness. Since this is not the first time Shania has been Mom's CNA, I'm surprised that she's surprised by the tattoo. There are times when I think everyone in this hospital has, at one point or another over the last several days, wiped my mother's behind and seen that tattoo. Also, Shania has sharp green eyes and has never missed a detail related to my mom's care, so perhaps she's just teasing her into telling a story. Oh, I was a wild one, Mom assures me, as she rolls toward me, and I hug her gently to help her over the hump of sheets in the middle of the bed as Shania smooths new sheets on her side. You want to know how I got that tattoo? I smile. She's in a playful mood today. Or maybe it's the pain medicine. This is not the first time that tattoo has drawn comment, but never before has she offered a story about it. In fact, I've commented on the tattoo periodically since my early adolescence, and the only story I know about it is that she got it during her drinking days, after her divorce from my father, but before her sobriety, so probably 1977 or 78. My ears perk up. Of course I do, Madam Butterfly, Shania teases. We smile at each other across the bed as Mom rolls away from me and I scoop out the dirty sheets and smooth the clean ones on my side. Shania arranges Mom's pillow and raises the back so she's sitting up again. I had a boyfriend once who wanted to be a tattoo artist. One night when we were pretty high, he got out his needles and we tattooed each other. She looks pleased with herself. For practice, she adds. That explains why the butterfly is so lopsided. I don't know which one of us looked more surprised, Shania or me. On the one hand, given what my mother has said openly about her drinking days, I can absolutely believe this. On the other, it's hard to imagine anyone ever thinking that practicing tattoo skills while drunk is a good idea. Then again, lots of bad ideas sound much better under intoxicating influences. Shania is apparently thinking along the same lines. Wow, Miss Judy, I know I was a little drunk when I got my first tattoo, but I'm sure glad the tattoo artist wasn't. I settle back into the reclining chair opposite the bed while Shania pops the thermometer in Mom's mouth and finishes taking her vitals. There's something I need to know, and I can't help but ask. So, you were both drunk, and he tattooed a butterfly on your ass. But you said you tattooed each other. What did you tattoo on him? Shania retrieves the thermometer and Mom grins. A chessboard. She waits a moment while Shania and I exchange glances. On his chest. Shania lets out a low whistle. Wow, that must have hurt. I wonder who this man was and how he sat still and allowed a drunken woman to tattoo something that required so many straight lines on his chest. Did she complete all 64 squares? Did she fill in the black ones? Was he so trashed that in the moment none of it mattered? I wonder if it matters now. How does he tell this story when someone looks at his aging chest and says, "So, where'd you get that?" I find myself wondering if that was the first time my mother mixed erotic pleasure with the administration of pain. If Shania weren't there, maybe I'd ask. I'm sure I'll get around to asking later. It's easy to forget how uncertain things are. It's easy to imagine there'll be plenty of time. Thank you. Now, if you want to know if my mother and I had time to finish that particular story, you will have to buy the book. But you have plenty of time right now to mix and mingle, have a drink. Please don't tattoo each other. You have plenty of time to wander around and meet the incredibly talented artists who are around the room. There are podcasters. There's a hands-on activity in the back where you can graph your sexual interests. And there's Red Emma's, who's here with us every year selling books for us. And I want to just take a moment to acknowledge why they are so special to me, not only because they're selling my book, for which I'm very grateful, but Red Emma's is not just a bookseller. Red Emma's is a radical collaborative, a radical co-op. And they do not only provide a literary home in their community of Baltimore, but they do other kinds of important community building work as well. And one of the things that they do that is really dear to my heart is the Baltimore Free School Project, where anyone who has something to teach can go and teach to anybody who wants to attend for free. And I can't think of a more radical act of democracy than that. So thank you, Red Emma's, for being here. And while we're talking just a moment about things you can do for your community, I want to let you know that as a person who puts my money where my mouth is, if you buy a book at the Summit, I have pledged to Ricky to donate $5 per book that's purchased at the Summit back to Woodhull. So you can think of this as a matching grant, in a sense. You buy a book and support Red Emma's, and I will donate my proceeds, plus a little bit more, because that's how book profits work, back to Woodhull, which is the organization who brought us all together tonight. So thank you so much. Enjoy.